Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. May the peace, love, and blessings of Allah be upon you. Hi, I'm Amun Yusuf, and in this short video we're going to look at the 5 phases of Islamic religious development. So, what are these 5 phases of personal Islamic religious development? Well, everyone in the world is in one of these phases right now. And these 5 phases actually apply to every religion and probably every political group as well, and other types of groups, but we're actually going to focus on the Muslim experience of your relationship to Islam through these 5 phases. So what I want you to do is, as we go through this short presentation, just kind of try and identify where you are in these phases. Notice if it seems like it's familiar to you, or if you happen to know other people who are in that phase right now. Because what's going to happen is, really soon as we go through this, you're going to understand yourself and your community a lot better. And the best part is, you're going to see a really simple roadmap to self-actualization, to bring out the best in yourself. So let's jump right in. Phase number 1. The first phase of Islamic religious development is disinterest. And that basically means you don't really see or get how Islam can help you in any way. So this could be because you're from a Muslim family, but you don't, practice Islam. You don't, you believe in it. Maybe you don't follow all the practices, and it's not a big deal to you. If it so happens that you're not from a Muslim background and you're not a Muslim, then Islam to you is probably one of many traditions that have beauty, and they're all very different and they all have great things to offer. But again, it's not really a big deal to you. You're quite disinterested in it. Now, if you're in this disinterest phase, it could be that you have some amount of respect or admiration for religious Muslims or spiritual Muslims. So you see them, wow, these guys really take it seriously. They pray 5 times a day. Or you might be quite impressed by the fact that some Muslims will fast every single day during the whole month of Ramadan, and you're like, wow. I can understand you not eating for the whole day, but not drinking anything as well. You guys, are you crazy? But then you see that hundreds of millions, maybe billions of people do it. So whether you're from a Muslim background or not, you may have some amount of respect or admiration for religious Muslims, and at the same time, it could be that you have a natural dislike for religious Muslims. It could be that you find them quite judgmental. Sometimes religious Muslims can put themselves in kind of an exclusive clique, where they're the people that run the mosque, and you just kind of get a feeling like it's not for you, or you don't fit in with that group. And that's really common. I think a lot of Muslims have that experience of the religious Muslim. But what really defines this group is, the truth is, if you're in the disinterested phase, it means you've probably never read the Quran or the life of the Prophet, or seen how it could help your life or apply to you in any kind of a real way. So it's kind of this thing that some people not like to do, and that's nice, but it doesn't affect you in any way. And then something happens and you move into phase 2, discovery. This is probably the most beautiful phase. This is where you all of a sudden you see how awesome Islam is, right? You're like, oh my gosh, this religion is so awesome. It's a religion that actually makes sense. It has all these beautiful things in it. Everything about Islam is beautiful. You go to the mosque and you love it. You love the feeling that you get when you're in the mosque and you pray. You love the community feeling. You pray just for the love of it, and you want to learn all of the different rituals and how to pray and how to fast, and you want to learn Arabic, and you want to learn how to read the Quran beautifully, like you hear it on those recordings. And it's almost like everything that you learn feels like a revelation. This is the most amazing phase, and this is why a lot of us have so much love for Islam, is because of the discovery phase. Everything that you learn about Islam when you're in this phase feels like a great revelation. It's just insight after insight, so much beauty in it. The downside with the discovery phase is it could lead to you being perhaps a little bit naive about the way the religion is, and perhaps even be easily misguided or even indoctrinated, because often there are people who are very happy to kind of show you their understanding of Islam, and what really happens is, in this phase you have a tendency, because you fall in love with Islam, and you have a tendency to be really active, like you want to share Islam with everyone, you want to find a good teacher and all this kind of stuff. So there is some level of naivety that comes with this, or kind of immaturity, but at the same time, that's a beautiful thing, you know. There's an innocence in the way that you perceive Islam for the first time when you first encounter it. And that's a really beautiful thing. And then you move on to phase 3. Identification. Pick a group, any group. So this is where you notice that there are actually loads of different types of Muslims. Whereas in phase 2 and phase 1 you might have just thought of Muslims as being one group of people, right? Who do, you know, they pray, they fast, they're Muslims, right? Well, as you move into phase 3, you start to notice, well, hang on, there's these different types of Muslims. And you might feel like you really resonate with some types or some of the groups, but not with others. And you like some of them more than others. In this phase, you kind of realize intuitively that you have more of a affinity towards one group than another, and you've realized that you are more like this group than like that group. And this is where all those different weird identification strategies come in. So as you realize that you're more from this group and less from another group, what happens is you start to become more and more certain that your group are the normal folks and everyone else are the weirdos. It's really funny how we always think everyone wants to believe that the way that they see Islam is the right way, and the way everyone else sees it is a little bit wrong, right? If you think that your group is right, then by default you kind of have an unconscious belief that all the other groups are wrong, which is kind of an interesting mindset. Because the challenge with that is what happens is a lot of these groups tend to form around teachers who have different perspectives. Right? Now, if you believe that your group is right and the other groups are wrong, or your teacher is right and the other one's wrong, what happens is you're actually going to miss out on a lot of the wisdom that the other teachers that aren't from your group have. See, everyone who teaches Islam does it from their own perspective, based on their own background, their own life experiences. If you're really attached to your teacher and to your group, you're actually going to miss out on a lot of wisdom, because the person who's from the other type of group, they may have a lot of great insights to share, but you won't be open to them. Now, if you're in this phase right now, if you're in the identification phase where you're trying to work out which group's the right group and you're getting really attached to that, then you might, as you're watching this, you might kind of be wondering, or the thoughts already cross your mind, which group or which scholar is this guy from, looking at me? So you're kind of wondering, like, who are you? Where are you from? Who's your scholar? Which group do you follow? And you might even consider what I'm sharing with you based on that factor alone, like which scholar I follow or which group I follow. And that's like a really cute phase we all go through, right? The kind of more dangerous part of this is you tend to accept assumptions without questioning them from the group that you're in. And you might even tend to follow rules that you don't really understand just in order to fit in with your group. That's leading into somewhere that's a little bit dangerous. If you start accepting silent assumptions that the whole group has and then following rules without really understanding them, then you need to start, questioning what's really going on there. And sometimes the assumptions that you make are really simple ones, and the rules that you follow are really simple ones. Often it's to do with the simplest things like dress code and mannerisms and things like that. Like, should you be having a really long beard, or should you turn the roll up your trousers when you walk into the mosque and things like that. Really small, insignificant things, but you'll slowly start to silently accept assumptions that everyone in the group makes and then follow rules you don't really understand. That's just the nature of the identification with a group. Now, the sad thing is that actually leads on to phase 4. And this is really disheartening. You could call this the disheartening phase. It's actually called disillusionment. I wish there was some way that I could just kind of protect you from having to go through this phase, and if I could just wrap a blanket of security around you so that you didn't have to go through this, I would love to be able to do that. What happens in this phase is you stop, because you're kind of into Islam and you're getting into it and you can see all the different groups and they're all trying to do good things in their own way, but when you're in the disillusionment phase, you'll see the kind of bickering, the infighting, the politics. You'll start to see the hypocrisy of different groups or different Islamic societies or associations, or even different mosques. Within the mosque, you'll start to see different mosques have kind of little beef with each other, which is very, it's very disheartening to see. And then within the mosque, or within the society, they have their own little infighting going on. So that's really lame, but it happens. When you're in this, if you've never experienced this, it probably means you haven't been really super involved in the mosque or in the Islamic society. Maybe you're still in the discovery phase, or you're just kind of getting into it. But the more that you get into it, you'll start to see the different groups in phase 3 with identification. And as you get really actively involved, then you start to maybe get a little bit disillusioned. When you're in the disillusionment phase, you can understand why there are so many people in the world who are in phase 1 of just disinterested, right? And then people that say, religion's the cause of all the world's problems, and you look at this and you're like, well, there is a lot of politics involved, right? So you can see why a lot of people will be in phase 1 and then never get to phase 2. You're like, well, who would want to come to the mosque when all this kind of stuff is going on, right? Often in the disillusionment phase, you'll realize that your group isn't as great as you thought it was, or your teacher isn't as great as you thought she was, right? Or as great as you thought he was. So you start to you're an insider now, and you start to see that it isn't all rainbows and butterflies as it might have seemed like when you were in the discovery phase. And the truth is, and the sad thing is, you might actually feel really shocked when you see when you get into the disillusion phase. You might feel shocked, or even feel regret. Remember how in phase 3 we were saying you may follow silent assumptions or rules that you didn't really question? Well, in phase 4, if you're going through the disillusionment phase, you might actually feel some amount of regret for not being true to yourself in phase 3. It could be that you feel shocked at the behavior of other people, or you just kind of wish that you were more true to yourself all the way through this process. So part of life, it's very natural. And ultimately, if you're really involved in promoting Islam or propagating it, or you're really going through all of the study circles and things like that, and you go into the identification and then you go into the disillusionment, ultimately it comes a point where you just want to pack it in. Phase 5 is called detachment, where you basically finally decide you're going to pack it in, I'm going to get on with life, get back to the real world. At this point, it's very normal for you to quit any kind of activism that you were involved in. If the other phases were happening at university, this is probably where you're like, oh, I've had enough of that, and you move on and you actually get a job, right? Normally, the detachment phase, it basically means taking a long break from all of that Islamic stuff, okay? The great thing about this phase is you tend to become more self-aware. You might take a little bit of time for introspection. You've gone through a lot of changes, and a lot of stuff has happened over the last few months or years as you've gone through those phases. And by the way, there's no set time that you're going to be in each of these phases. Some people stay in the discovery phase for a few months or years. Some people stay in the identification phase for years and years, right? But ultimately, I think people will gradually move through all of these phases. At least that's been my experience of most of the people that I know. So phase 5, it's detachment. You start to become more self-aware, take time for introspection. You're almost processing all of the stuff that happened in the other phases. Now, what happens at the end of the detachment phase is you might just go straight back in, join another group. Maybe you figure that it was the group that was a group that you identified with. Maybe that was the problem. So then you go and find another group and then repeat the last 3 phases. And then if you could also just decide to not focus that much on Islam and on religious stuff, and actually just decide to focus more on getting a good job and working on that, or marriage and starting a family. So your kind of direction or focus changes a little bit. And ultimately, you're going to be grateful for all of the friends that you made along the way as you went through these 5 phases. Now, here's the thing. I say it's the 5 phases of Islamic religious development. Most people will just end here. And then that whole Islam thing, where they were really religious for a while, that was just a phase for them. And if we were to make a bell curve, what would happen is, in the center of the bell curve, probably the majority of people would end in phase 5 of detachment and be like, okay, well, that was nice. Now I know a little bit more about religion. I know a little bit more about how the whole community works, and that's enough of that. So if it was the bell curve, probably the middle, which is the vast majority of people, would be there. Now there would be a small group of people who actually go back through those phases again, which I've already mentioned. And on the other side, there would be a small group of people that actually move on somewhere a little bit more productive from here, or somewhere more rewarding that makes everything else worthwhile. So for a very few people, there's going to be 2 more phases. For phase 6, that again, just a small amount of the bell curve will actually move on to phase 6. It's actually making self-development a real focus in your life. Now in all of the other phases, there's probably been talk of self-development. There's been talk of tarbiyah, right? Training yourself, different religious programs. A lot of that is based around just trying to get people to understand Islam in a way so that they go out and become active. So you have activists trying to get other people to become active, and that's all good. But the key distinction between that stuff and this phase is now self-development becomes the key, which is you take it upon yourself. You see, what's happened is, by now you've gone through a lot of emotional experiences, and you kind of realize you really need to get to work on yourself. If you're gonna, you kind of start to understand you need to be the change that you want to see in the world. You need to be Islam and really live it, rather than trying to hold on to the image of Islam and then show other people that image. Now you're more like, okay, no, I need to get to work on me. I need to get serious about working on myself. You know by the time you're in phase 6 that if you want to change the world, you really need to get to work on yourself. Now, in this phase, people will tend to become attracted to personal development courses. And if you've been through the other 5 phases, you might be like, every time you go to a personal development course and you learn something new, you may feel like, oh man, I wish I knew this back then. It would have made such a difference for the organization I was in. Or you might feel like, oh, if only every Muslim had this skill, maybe then all the problems of the Ummah would alleviate themselves. And there probably tends to be more of an attraction towards productivity and leadership courses. But as you get deeper, you start to realize that there is something deeper than that, and that's really self-development, personal development. Now, when it comes to personal development, you only have really 2 or 3 options. One is you go to the non-Muslim-led personal growth courses. This is usually the best option because non-Muslim-led personal growth courses, extremely high quality. These people have made it into the mainstream through teaching personal development. So the stuff that they teach is really good, really practical. You can apply it to your own life. And it tends to follow an application model, which we'll talk about in a moment. And then another kind of personal development course is kind of a Muslim watered down version of those courses, right? I mean, there are very few Muslims that are the kind of industry leaders in self-development. Although I see that happening in the future. There are a couple of examples, like Rafiq Beacon is an industry leader. I would say in NLP, Shahid Akmal is becoming an industry leader. So there's a few examples of real industry leaders. But at the same time, the Muslim watered down version, what they usually is somebody goes to a course and then they're like, okay, we need to teach this to our Islamic association. So then they go and try and teach the stuff that they've learned, which is, it's a step in the right direction, and it's great to see that happening. The other option is when you've gone through all of that other stuff and you focus on self-development, you start thinking, okay, maybe I need Islamic self-development. So then you start going to Islamic courses. You start searching for some kind of authentic spiritual growth within the tradition of Islam. Now, what happens when you go on those types of courses is one of 2 things. Either a lot of those courses are set up, and this could be, tafsir courses where you're learning exegesis or how to understand the Quran. Could be courses on all sorts of Islamic topics, all sorts of areas of, fiqh, aqidah, seerah. There's a lot of different things that these courses are on. As a general thing, one of 2 things is happening. Either it's going to be an information-based model or an application-based model. Now, what does that mean? So the information model is the typical thing where you go to the Islamic lecture and they teach you the fiqh and the aqidah and all that stuff. It's just great information. The challenge with the information model is it can be fascinating, it can be interesting, it can be intriguing. Rarely does it lead to personal transformation. Rarely do you suddenly become the kind of person who just embodies all of that information. And so then, we start to develop, okay, so we need something to help people apply it more. So then we develop the application model. And the application model, that's basically what most of the non-Muslim led personal growth courses are. They're application models, which is, instead of just teaching you all this stuff, they teach you some stuff and then they say, okay, now let's look at this step-by-step strategy on how to apply it. Now there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, it's a good model. Actually, I have a course called the Time for Quran program, which is an application-based course, right? It's like, okay, you want to achieve your Quran goals, therefore you're going to need all these strategies. So here's the step-by-step, 6-step process in order to achieve the goal of understanding the Quran in Arabic, or memorizing the Quran, or achieving your tajweed goal, or whatever it is. So that's the application-based model. So the information is kind of the what, giving you all of the information, and you just trying to kind of absorb it and digest it all. The application-based model is more of the how, like, what are all the different steps involved to actually apply it. Now there's the thing with both of those is they don't quite take you to where you really want to go, which is the who, which is, instead of just knowing the what and knowing the how, you want to be the person that just embodies all of that stuff naturally. Very few people go all the way through to phase 7 of self-actualization. Now, in order to attain self-actualization, what it really requires is for you to become deeply aware of your own nafs, of your own ego, such that it doesn't block your potential. And by self-actualizing, what that really means is, because you've become more deeply aware of your nafs, all of a sudden you start to embody all of the internal characteristics and states that you need to just achieve everything that you want. So in the context of Islamic development, what that means is you access all of the spiritual states that the Quran talks about through your own personal insightful exploration of the Quran. And this is what I call the implication model. This is where you pick up a copy of the Quran, you read it, and you just deeply, insightfully understand the implications that those verses have for you personally. You don't need somebody to break down the step-by-step strategy of how to apply that verse. You just see it and it's like, oh, wow. It causes transformation just by looking at it. This is where you get all of the insights, the breakthroughs, the aha moments. This is where you just read something spiritual, you read something deep, and all of a sudden, all of your limiting beliefs erode all by themselves. You don't even need to do anything. It's already done for you, because when you can see the implications of what the implication is of that thing in your life, you don't need anything else. All of a sudden you start to access your own, well, let's look at what happens. You start to love more. You love to pray. You love to fast. All of the acts of worship in Islam, you just do them out of love. You do them because you enjoy them so much. Because you start to access the spiritual states of ihsan, iman. Islam itself is a spiritual state, right? Inner peace. With the application model, what will also happen is you'll become the kind of person who just naturally, effortlessly achieves your goals. Motivation, you don't need to do things to get yourself motivated. You're just naturally motivated. It's what I call effortless productivity, where you just naturally want to take action, right? There's no inner resistance going on in your mind. You don't have all this nafs thought, which we'll get into later. You don't have all this thought that's blocking you from just fulfilling your potential. It's like, oh, I want to learn a new language. Okay, I'll go do it. There's no middle step, right? You self-actualize. As you do this, what emerges is you start to discover your highest ibadah. Your highest ibadah is the thing that Allah put you on this planet to do. It is all other acts of worship, fasting, praying, meditating, dhikr, all of those things are actually preparing you internally for you to do your highest ibadah. This is the thing that you're gonna do that will contribute to the world, and you'll kind of leave your mark on the world in a way that no one else possibly could. Now, I don't know what your highest ibadah is. It could be anything from writing a book to becoming a doctor to climbing Mount Everest, right? If there's 7 billion people on earth, there are 7 billion different highest ibadahs, most likely. So no one can tell you what your highest ibadah is. It has to come from within you. When you self-actualize, you start to realize it all by yourself. When you self-actualize, you start to be guided by your innate wisdom. All of a sudden you realize you don't need fatwas to tell you how to do everything. You realize what you really need is more taqwa. When you have more taqwa, everything else just kind of falls into place. You just naturally know what the right thing to do is. The simplicity of Islam comes back to you all of a sudden. In its simplicity is its depth. You start to embody the natural qualities of a leader. You don't need to read a step-by-step how to do leadership book. All of a sudden you just are a leader. You can't stop people looking up to you as a leader in your field because you naturally embody the confidence, the charisma, the inspiration, all the things that you need to actually just be a great leader. You have them inside of you already. And as you self-actualize, you bring them out. Now here's the thing with phase 7 of self-actualization. I've worked in personal growth a lot. I've seen the pros and cons of the application model. The thing with the application model is sometimes you have the step-by-step strategies, right? And I work in this industry, so I see it all the time. People will buy the programs and then never go through them. Even with the Time for Quran program, this is step-by-step how to achieve any Quran goal you want. Guess what happens? People don't apply it because they're still working from the application model of the how-to, rather than becoming the person you need to be in order to just naturally attract that stuff, in order to naturally do what you need to do to bring that stuff into your life. When you self-actualize, you can create the step-by-step plan. You'll go and do something innovative and creative that no one's ever done before, and then you'll write the how-to book. That's self-actualization. The thing with self-actualization is I honestly believe you cannot self-actualize without aligning yourself with the 7 core Quran insights. Throughout history, the greatest people in history, you might say, well, Mamoon, what about this person or that person? What about the greatest leaders in history? They didn't have the 7 core Quran insights. Maybe they never read the Quran. Maybe, but maybe they were in line with the core Quran values without even knowing what they were. That happens sometimes too. The spiritual values of the Quran are universal. There were prophets' messages sent to every society since the beginning of time. So what I'm really saying is the Quran came to bring out the best in you. It came to help you master your nafs, master your ego, to unleash your true potential. The problem is most people don't connect the dots between reading the Quran, which they know is a good thing that they're meant to do, and actualizing so they can achieve all of the goals that they really want to achieve. Most people can't connect the dots between those two things. Those dots are the 7 core Quran secrets, the 7 core Quran insights. Now, ultimately, when you go through this, when you come out the other side of really getting the 7 core Quran secrets, what happens is the Quran becomes an ever-deepening source of inspiration. It becomes your daily source of guidance and motivation. And really, you self-actualize. Now, very last thing I want to do is a quick overview of the 7 phases. Again, phase 1 was disinterest. Phase 2, discovery, where you see how awesome Islam is. Phase 3 is identification, where you get into all the different groups. Phase 4 is disillusionment, where you you break up with those different groups. Phase 5 is detachment, where you kind of pack it all in and don't want anything else to do with those religious dudes. Phase 6, you then move into wanting to develop yourself, and you get into the whole self-development world. Phase 7 is self-actualization, where the Quran becomes your source of inspiration, motivation, and it helps you self-actualize by empowering you to embody all of the qualities of the great person you were put on this planet to be. You'll discover more about the 7 core Quran secrets in the upcoming webinar. Until then, I've been Mamoon Yousaf. You have been giving me your most valuable asset, your time and your attention, and I deeply appreciate it. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. May the peace, love and blessings of Allah be showered upon you.